Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief Special. Today we're going to be talking about all of the anti-Ukrainian, manipulative, and fake comments under the videos on this channel. And we have come up with quite a few of them to open up a dialogue with you, because honestly, listen, I get really frustrated when I hear very, very ignorant and silly questions or comments that are obviously from bots or obviously from someone who understands nothing about Ukraine. But what I've realized is that, yes, sure, I have to answer these every day and it's been 3 years of war, but honestly, my frustration is not going to result in anything, but constructive dialogue might. So let's go. Well, boy, is this going to be fun for those of you who understand what's happening in Ukraine. And the first comment on our list today is, well, prepare yourself.
Lo all, Ukraine's vision for peace. Dear Ukraine, the vision is simple. You forget about joining NATO ever. That would cause the war to never happen. But you chose to sacrifice your people in a war with Russia. You chose to go to war. It wasn't a surprise. Russia said it will do it. You had a second chance at peace when you signed a negotiation framework in Istanbul in 2023. And as Russians started falling back, you attacked them and then claimed how stupid they are.
Well, so there is a lot more to this comment, and we're going to get to it because I feel like this comment is, hey, listen, it's huge, the whole page. So let's do it one by one. As to this rhetoric of joining NATO, NATO is not the reason why Russia attacked, and no one has ever said it better than Kuleba, our former foreign minister, in this video. So take a look.
I sometimes hear people say that Russia was forced to attack Ukraine because Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. Those people also often say that NATO promised it would not expand to the east, but later broke this promise. And this, allegedly, is the reason why Russia keeps attacking its neighbors. If you have ever heard people say something like that, please know that this is not true. And it will take me less than 5 minutes to prove with facts that both statements are false. First, let's have a look at the timeline of events. Russia first invaded Ukraine in February 2014 by occupying the Crimea Peninsula. At that moment, Ukraine was a neutral country by law and expressed no intention of joining NATO whatsoever. For instance, during the Revolution of Dignity, the protesters insisted on Ukraine joining the EU, not NATO. It was only in autumn 2014, after many months of war, that Ukraine abandoned neutrality. So what came first? Russia attacking Ukraine or Ukraine wanting to join NATO? The answer is clear. Had Russia not threatened Ukraine's existence, there would be no reason for our country to seek collective security. So please, do not repeat the lie that, I quote, Russia attacked because Ukraine wanted to join NATO, end of quote. This does not correspond with the facts. Now let's have a look at the story of NATO allegedly promising not to expand to the east. If you ask people who say this, when exactly such a promise was made and who made it, most of them will not be able to provide a clear answer. Spoiler, because no such promise has ever been made and the whole story is a Russian fairy tale. Those more sophisticated will tell you that the promise was made to the president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev. They may even refer to the 1990 US-Soviet negotiations on the reunification of Germany. Again, let's consider the timeline. In summer 1990, when these talks were held, the Soviet analog of NATO, the Warsaw Pact, still existed. Its dissolution, let alone the Soviet Union's dissolution, was not on the cards. No one even talked about it or imagined it. It was only next year, in 1991, that the Warsaw Pact and later the USSR quite unexpectedly ceased to exist. Now explain to me just how the very issue could be even discussed in the summer of 1990. It is not surprising that Mikhail Gorbachev later himself refuted this falsehood. When asked by a journalist whether any such promise had been made, he said this was a myth. Now let's look at it from another perspective. How could NATO even promise anything like that? Initially, it is not NATO that decides which country joins it. Countries themselves need to want it, and actually, the membership criteria are very difficult. It requires a lot of political will and reform. All the NATO members that joined it after 1991 really wanted to be part of it. The people wanted this. And here comes the most uncomfortable question for Russia. Why were all of the nations that had been part of the Soviet Union or the socialist bloc so eager and desperate to join NATO? Well, maybe because in 3 decades Russia has invaded or incited war in at least 3 of its neighbors: Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. At the same time, Russia has not dared to invade any of its NATO neighbors. Do you see the pattern? The only reason for countries in the vicinity of Russia to seek NATO membership has always been and remains the need to protect their people from Russia. Therefore, Moscow has only itself to blame for the fact that all of the Central European and Baltic nations ran away from it and hid under the NATO umbrella as quickly as they could. Do not let Russian officials or their supporters in the West fool you. Russia attacked Ukraine not because NATO expanded to the east or because Ukraine wanted to join NATO. Russia attacked because it denies Ukraine's right to exist and wants to conquer our land and kill our people. It is through our shared strength that we can and must stop Russia and put an end to its aggressive plans for the rest of Europe. For this to happen, keep supporting Ukraine and don't buy Russian lies.
Now that we got that out of the way, and I don't think I need to be adding anything more to this brilliant explanation, I do want to focus on the 2023 negotiation framework in Istanbul. It was not negotiation, it was an ultimatum. Russia wanted Ukraine to surrender all of our territories, and then it would stop the war. We've signed Minsk agreements before, and Russia has never adhered to a ceasefire. So signing an agreement with Russia really means nothing, but giving Russia time to regroup, reconnect, gain more military personnel, and send them back to war and attack you. So no, we did not attack Russia, and we did not tell them they're stupid. There was never a ceasefire or never a peace agreement signed in Istanbul, and there was never a negotiation. First of all, there was an attempt at poisoning some of the people in the Ukrainian delegation coming from the Russian side. Allegedly, of course, because there is not enough proof that it was the Russians who tried to poison them. But, you know, I don't know why that would be the case, provided that, you know, Russians have never, ever, ever tried to take out their political opponents with Novichok and other such mechanisms. But anyways.
You had thrid chance at talks when Russia was actually surprised and was on a back foot after you massively attacked them, as mentioned above. And you had won fair amount of land back. But you thought you could march straight into Moscow. Too bad within weeks the Russians converted this war into an attritional war, went from battle brigades to divisional command, and stabilized the front lines. That was late 2023.
Well, first of all, what do you mean we attacked Russians? We did not attack Russians. We got our land back, which you mean the Kharkiv counteroffensive and Kherson counteroffensive. This has nothing to do with Russia. We were not trying to march straight into Moscow. That was never the plan. There was not even an ambition to that. We returned our land that Russia invaded illegally when they attacked us. You still had a chance at peace and talked the 4th time, but this time Russia wasn't budging on its preconditions. Russia wasn't budging on its ultimatums from the very beginning. It just wanted all of Russia's conditions for peace were demilitarization of Ukraine, whatever the denazification of Ukraine means, surrendering of all Ukrainian territories that Russia wants right now, which is like 4 separate Ukrainian oblasts, which are like the size of more than Denmark. And then the precondition was also to remove our president that we democratically elected and put a president that Russia decided to put in power, which would likely be Yanukovych, a president that we had already ousted because he went against his people. Those are not preconditions. Those are ultimatums. Oh, and also the other precondition was Ukraine never joins NATO, and Ukraine is not allowed to make partnerships with the EU, and basically it was a complete economic and cultural and political defeat of Ukraine. Right. Sure. That's a great condition. I'm sure you would have taken it.
You launch a counteroffensive, which you advertise to everyone in the world. It too, Russia, 3 weeks to blow the steam out of your counteroffensive, and you depleted most of your forces in the forward zone. You reached the first line of defense around only one village, and even that gain of 2 square kilometers is gone now. You had sacrificed battalions over there.
Yes, that counteroffensive was not good, and to be frank and to be honest, Zaluzhny, our former chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, should have honestly told the West that no matter how much you want the results, we're not ready to deliver them because we do not have enough weapons, and at that point, we do not have enough trained men. But we were under so much pressure that I think we caved and we decided to try and deliver results because honestly, at that point, Ukraine had that image of like, oh, unbroken, unbreakable, kind of like people who can defeat Russia with, I don't know, swords and shovels in our arms. And we kind of caved to it, and we should not have. That counteroffensive indeed was a failure, and it was a failure for a lot of reasons, but none of them are Russia is so great and so strong. It's poor planning, a lot of pressure. A lot of the deliveries of the weapons that were promised that year did not come, and there was a complete fiasco with the delivery of shell rounds. So yes, it was a horrendous time for a counteroffensive. Now you go into Kursk, but Russia stabilized the front line too, and you lost your fortress city of Vuhledar and Avdiivka.
Sorry, Russia has lost too much in this war, and they aren't going to give you anything back. And yes, they will stop the war, on condition you don't join NATO. Else they are clearly setting up to make a move on Odessa. And diversion Army Kiev counteroffensive may be in the weighing. Just like their much-rumored Kharkiv counteroffensive, which caused you to pull troops out from Vuhledar, since your reserves were sent into Kursk. Turns out the Russians simply outsmarted you. Now you are losing your best men and equipments in Kursk. Russia is capturing 30 to 40 square kilometers of land every day. And that too, in areas which had been fortified since 2014. Once they entered Dnieper, what can you do?
There are no areas that Russia is capturing that have been fortified since 2014 because Russia has, in fact, invaded those territories in 2014, and the only people fortified in those areas are Russians, and that's the problem for Ukrainians to get those lands back. I did explain to you already, with the help of Kuleba, why NATO is not the issue here. And this entire comment really is just Russian propaganda to the maximum. But the idea that Russia somehow is going to stop this war because of NATO is just ludicrous. Russia is not interested in territory. Russia is the largest country in the world. Do you think it really needs more territory? It really does not. Russia is protecting Russian speakers. That's also a shitty excuse because Russia is killing Russian speakers every day. Look at Zaporizhia. Look at what happened in Zaporizhia. There is a human safari in Kherson where Russian soldiers and drone operators get additional bonuses and premiums for shooting down civilian cars and buses, hunting them with drones, which is why it's called a human safari. Russia is not here because of NATO. Russia is not here because it wants more territory. Russia is not here because it wants to protect Russian speakers. Russia is here to completely destroy us. Yes, they want the entirety of Ukraine. Yes, they want to erase us from existence. But if it were you, would you just give in because they want something? The idea that Ukraine is supposed to give in to Russia just because Russia wants it is so backwards. We're fighting for our independence. We're fighting for our chance for survival. Yeah, sure, Russia might have some progress and we might be in attritional warfare right now. But the idea still stands. Russia wants to erase us from existence. We have our language. We have our culture. You can't deny it because we celebrate holidays that Russia doesn't celebrate. We speak a language that Russians don't understand or don't know. Whether you dislike the idea of it existing or not, it still exists. And Russia wants it gone. So tell me, why should we stop fighting? And tell me, would you, if your entire existence was under erasure from someone else, would you just give in and let them do it simply because, well, I mean, they want it? And you should have negotiated and you should have just given them what they want. It's kind of like if someone was to come to your family and say, hey, we're going to kill your kids and your wife, but we're going to leave your parents alive. Would you not fight back for your wife and your kids? I think you would. This entire idea of Russia trying to negotiate while Russia is destroying the majority of the country is just laughable. And the idea of Russia's preconditions, being that preconditions, not ultimatums, is also laughable. And the idea that we're somehow provoking Russia by getting our own land back is even more laughable. The reason why Ukraine went into Kursk is to show the world that entering Russia is not going to make Russia do any worse things than it has already done to us, because it has already pretty much done everything that it could to against humanity except for nuclear weapons. So we wanted to show that Russia is not untouchable and that the world should stop fearing it as much as it does. Next comment.
Why does a person from the UK need to be in Ukraine to help with the war? Ever heard of the Budapest Memorandum? Read point 3 of that document, please. How hysterical was the West responding to the presence of North Korean troops in Russia? Oh, get it. Only Western military personnel is allowed to help Ukraine, but Russia has to fight the battle alone and is not supposed to get foreign support.
Well, first of all, the Budapest Memorandum was an agreement on security guarantees and assurances for Ukraine, and the countries that signed it really did not come to help Ukraine. And if you didn't know, and if you didn't watch that interview, I think it's so fresh and it's so relevant here. I'm just going to let our president answer that one.
It was a piece of paper, if you are curious, by the way, that after occupying part of our Donbas and Crimea, Ukraine sent diplomats 3 times. I don't think I remember, 3 times within a few years. We sent letters to all security guarantors, to all members of the Budapest Memorandum. What did they send? That what was written on the piece of paper. Consultations. Ukraine holds consultations if its territorial integrity is violated. And everyone should be in consultation. Everyone must come. Everyone must meet urgently. USA, Britain, Russia, France, China. Did anyone come, you ask? No. Did anyone reply to these letters, official letters? They are all recorded by diplomats. Did anyone conduct consultations? No. And why not? They didn't give a fuck. This is understandable in Russian, right? That as Russia didn't give a damn, neither did all the other security guarantors of the Budapest Memorandum. None of them gave a damn about this country, these people, these security guarantees, etc.
So it's not hypocrisy for Ukraine to get help, but for Russia to not get help, and here is why. Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and our people are being killed every day on the territory of Ukraine by Russian soldiers who cross the border illegally. We are being helped in defense. Russia is being helped in offense. Russia has committed one of the record amounts of war crimes since World War II and World War I. Russia has committed more war crimes in this war than there have been in World War I and World War II. Russia illegally crossed the border and illegally invaded another sovereign nation. Russia is the offender here. So yes, listen, if you ask police to help you defend yourself in the robbery of a bank, aka you were at a bank, you were taking money out of your bank account, and then suddenly robbers ran in to that bank and started attacking you. Is there a problem with police coming to your rescue and helping you? Because obviously the people inside, even if you know how to use a weapon, are not necessarily well equipped to fight a massive gang of robbers. So you would agree that it's okay for the police to help you. But then what if the police were starting to help the robbers? Would you think that's okay? Would you also be like, well, but how is this fair that the people inside of the bank are allowed to use the police to help them, but the robbers aren't? It's not fair. Yeah, that's the whole point. You know, Russia is committing a crime. Russia is committing war crimes. Russia is being tried in The Hague for all of the war crimes they've committed. Because what Russia is doing is illegal. What Ukraine is doing is it's defending itself. So calling it a double standard is a little silly and also offensive. It's not a double standard. It's not a double standard to help a country defending itself versus help a country who is committing an international crime. Really not a double standard. Also, the countries that are helping Russia are using illegal weapons. They're blackmailing the world with nuclear weapons. They are committing war crimes systematically and systemically. These are mercenaries. Russia is recruiting North Korean soldiers to fight a war for them. Russia is lying to Indian people, saying that they would give them jobs and recruiting them to go to the front line and throwing them at the front line. Russia is lying to other populations to do that. Russia is meddling in Africa. Russia is not doing this honestly. The people from the United States or from the UK or from France who go to fight in Ukraine come here to do so without a mercenary paycheck. They do that for ideology because they want to help a struggling nation. They do that themselves. Russia recruits soldiers from armies of North Korea based on a contract with their dictator, not on their free will. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what's waiting for them. They don't have access to free information. They're doing that against their will and against their better knowledge. Russia is also lying to people in other countries to come and join the military, saying they're going to pay them out of the wazoo and they're going to put them at a desk job. And then these foreign nationals arrive and Russia throws them at a front line. So ethically, these are two very different things. All right. Next one.
Population of Donbas was 90% Russian in 2013. In 2014, CIA took $5 billion American taxpayers' money to form a coup to overthrow a pro-Russia democratically elected president and force him to leave the country. Then the newly installed oligarch banned as much as he could that was considered Russian culture. Ethnic Russians living generation after generation in what became Ukraine in 1991 protested this Nazi-style treatment, and the Nazis shot at them and burned them alive in Odessa. After 8 years of Ukraine bombing neighborhoods, Russia proper finally stepped in.
So, first of all, let's talk about the population of Donbas being 90% Russian in 2013 and 2014. Here with me, I have the demographic breakdown of Donbas as of January 1st, 2014. At that point, the amount of people living in Donetsk Oblast was 4,344,000 people, which is 9.6% of the population of Ukraine. The density of the population was the highest in all of the regions of Ukraine. 164 people per square kilometer. And here is what the demographic density of the population was like. Ukrainians, 56.9%. So people who could have potentially spoken Russian but identified as Ukrainians. Russians, 38.2%, which is people who identify as Russians. Greeks, 1.6%, Belarusians, 0.9%, Tatars, 0.4%, Jews, 0.3%, and other nationalities, 1.7%. So when you say that the CIA took $5 billion of American taxpayer money, that is just propaganda from somewhere. I don't know where you took it from, but there is reasonably, absolutely zero proof of this. Also, when you say that this president was democratically elected, as in Yumin Yanukovych, you're not wrong. But the thing is, he was elected because he promised people a pro-European platform. He was running on the promise that he would move Ukraine closer to Europe and he would stop the tensions between the Russian speakers and the Ukrainian speakers in Ukraine, which there were no tensions. He made these tensions up and then he was also going to fix them. But the main point is he was voted in because he said we'd be separating ourselves from Russia, moving away from it, and going to Europe. On the day on which Ukraine was supposed to sign the declaration of the path to the European integration, without consulting the population that was absolutely sure he was going to sign it, he decided to not sign it and then announced instead that he's going to sign CSTO, which is basically Soviet Union 2.0 X meets NATO 2.0 from Russia. I'm sorry, that is not what the population voted for at all. So when you say that someone in a coup ousted this president, you're lacking simple knowledge of the geopolitical situation in the country to begin with. We ousted him because that president no longer, and as it turns out, never represented what the population wanted. And in a democracy, your leaders are supposed to represent you, not vice versa. It's Russia, where the population represents what the leader wants, not the other way around. Then, when you're talking about what happened in Odessa, actually, that did not happen like that at all. In fact, there were pro-Russian demonstrators paid who came there, started inciting violence and inciting the events, and then they themselves started the fire. The Ukrainian football fans came to the main square in Odessa specifically because there were already provocations taking place there at that point, and they came to protect their city and protect the population of their city. Russian propaganda took this story, took this narrative, and made it into something else, just like Russia does all the time. So let's please not warp history. When you say that after 8 years of these awful things that Ukraine did to Donbas, here's what Donbas looked like after all of these years, that Ukraine was doing terrible things to them, that Russia was, just prompted to come and save these people. Here is what it looks like when Russia came to save these people after 3 years. Yes, I think that no further commentary is necessary on this subject. Do you?
The reason why there is no financial accountability is because money is thrown into Zelensky, of which 50% makes it to the war. Zelensky is pocketing much of the money, the politicians, and the generals. And much of the equipment is sold to the black market.
There is zero evidence. There is actually an American commission that operates here year-round that has not once found any mishandling of the American aid. But we will get to that.
Of course, the generals do not have any concept of investment in recruiting, training, and equipping. They have no concept of paying for lost or surrendered equipment because the USA and the EU will keep on throwing more money, arms, munitions, and equipment. They squander everything and do not have value of the soldiers on the front line, which is evidenced by the order to hold the front line at all cost, even though being overrun is imminent.
We're holding the front line at all cost because being overrun means that our entire population and our culture is going to be erased. Zelensky is not pocketing the money because in the majority of the cases, we're not getting the money. We're not getting financial aid. And before you make statements like that, I really truly do wish you to start understanding your own economy and the way that financial aid works and how America operates on the economic level to begin with, because 99% of the aid, well, actually, I might be lying. Let's say over 90% of the money that is announced for Ukraine actually stays in America and pays for jobs in America and production of munitions in America. Ukraine mostly gets weapons. The weapons don't end up on the black market. It was one article of Russian propaganda that was trying to make rounds on the internet but has been debunked many, many times, and no evidence has been found of that by all of the independent commissions that have tried to verify it or dispute it, right? So no evidence of that happening. That is absolute lies. Secondly, the other aid that is being announced, which is like, reconstruction aid or financial aid to pay for teachers or for something, is also not raw cash being transferred into Ukraine's bank account. These are grants, and those grants actually recruit per se American companies or French companies or Finnish companies, depending on where this aid is coming from, in order to contract them to reconstruct certain things in Ukraine. So it's not even Ukraine that is getting that financial aid. It's actually Ukraine is getting the result of that financial aid, but in reality, most of that aid still stays in the country that sends it. And then again, when you're hearing that Ukraine has received a tank that was worth $100 million, for instance, that is also not necessarily true. The amount of money announced in the package is the equivalent of the cost of weapons at the time at which they were manufactured. So Ukraine mostly gets weapons that were manufactured in like the 60s. So let's say Ukraine gets 10 Abrams tanks. And I'm just taking this is a made-up amount, this is not how much Abrams cost. And let's say each of these tanks is $100 million. So the U.S. announces 10 tanks for $100 million. Today, these tanks cost $10 million, each of them. But at the day at which they were manufactured, they cost $100 million. So they're not going to say that Ukraine is getting tanks worth $10 million each. They're going to announce that Ukraine is getting tanks that were worth 100 million, which at the time at which they were produced. So your great grandfather's taxes paid for it, or grandfather's taxes paid for it when it was manufactured. And these tanks that America will never use because they're outdated and unnecessary for America at all need to be paid for to store them in America. So it's actually cheaper to send them to Ukraine, right? And then that 100 million is actually taken to create new weapons for America. So Ukraine gets a $10 million tank and you get 100 million to produce weapons in America. That creates jobs. Hope that explained to you how Zelensky is not pocketing money and how Zelensky is not getting personal checks into his or Ukraine's bank accounts. I'm going to start going through these comments a little faster because I think I am taking a long time. At ChrisMoney305, this is bitter. Ukrainian people need to understand that what he's trying to say is that this war has been lost. Russia was supposed to take Ukraine in 3 days. It's been 3 years and Russia still hasn't taken Ukraine. Yes, sure, right now they're having some advances, but Russia lost like 50% of the territory it gained in 2023 when it came in initially. So I wouldn't say this is going good for Russia. Also, Ukraine had just invaded Russia recently, so I don't really know what you're talking about.
Truth is bitter. Ukrainian people need to understand that this war has been lost. Make peace with your big brother. Slava Russia.
I mean, the comment "Slava Russia" explains what side you're on initially and what your biases are, but also Russia is not our big brother. Just because you have a neighbor and they've been there forever, it doesn't mean that you have to be friends with them if they're abusive. I would hope that if you have an abusive brother or cousin or neighbor and they consistently keep torturing you and abusing you and assaulting you, you wouldn't maybe make peace with them. You would call the cops, which is what Ukraine is doing. Mr. Victor 1945.
Zelensky has nothing to lose in Ukraine. Country is not his motherland. People are not of his compatriots. He's simply a butcher of Slavic people. If I'm not right, ask him about how many men he lost belong to his community.
Well, so this comment is in very broken English, so it's actually quite hard to say, but Zelensky is the only leader, really, in almost ever in such circumstance that didn't flee but stood with his people and went out to the streets and stayed in the country and didn't flee and didn't take the ride and really stood behind us. It's not Zelensky who wants to fight this war. It's us who want to fight this war. And if Zelensky decides tomorrow that he wants to sign a peace agreement with Russia and surrender Ukraine, boy, is he going to be in trouble because the entirety of Ukraine is going to go against that. He's doing what we want, not what he wants. And his background is he's a Ukrainian Jew. You can be Jewish and Ukrainian. You can be Jewish and French. You can be Jewish and German. I hope that was clear enough. So yes, it is his people and it is his community.
This podcast creator, his hate and way of thinking about Russians is so wrong. He is brainwashed by his own evil government.
No, I mean, we are able to hate the people that are killing us every day. Again, let me show you what's been happening in Zaporizhzhia today. And this happens in Ukrainian cities on a daily. I'm going to give you some more examples. They're rough to watch, but this is what Ukrainians go through every day. So criticizing your butcher and criticizing someone who's slaughtering you is okay. Hating everything about them and their culture and what they represent is also okay, because this is not a singular occasion. This is not unfair. This is not biased. This is the result of going through this and of trying to reason with this country and with its people and with its leader for so many decades and ending up in a situation where it keeps getting more and more abusive every year. It's okay to hate your abuser. And also, Ukrainians want peace, but we want peace on just terms. So thinking that there is no difference between surrendering to Putin and So thinking that peace is only surrendering to Putin and not having absolutely any critical thinking or nuance to it is not okay either. Ukrainians want peace. It's not that Ukrainians want to continue war. No, we don't. But we don't want for the war to end on Russia's terms because it's not going to end. Giving Russia what Russia wants is not going to end the war. It's going to put a lot of people in occupation, and a lot more people are going to be repressed, stripped of their rights, tortured, essayed, just like they are on every occupied territory. Ukraine wants peace more than anyone, but we want it just and lasting. And for dessert, this is our last commentary of the day.
We must have watched a different interview. It certainly wasn't Lex Friedman's intention. He's very pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia. But Zelensky did his case a lot of damage in this interview, I believe. Only Ukrainian supporters say they believe Putin will attack the rest of Europe if Ukraine doesn't stop him. Most observers can see that Zelensky keeps repeating this boogeyman lie to deflect the good people of the world from seeing the obvious, namely that the USA, NATO, EU, Ukraine deliberately provoked this war and are deliberately prolonging it because they would rather see more Ukrainians needlessly die than admit that Russia beat them. One day, when the dust settles, Zelensky and his USA, NATO, EU collaborators will face trial for all this death and destruction they have unnecessarily caused.
Last time I checked, Russia is the one sending missiles, glided bombs, cluster bombs, drones, mines, all of these things onto Ukraine, and that's what causes destruction, not Zelensky. Zelensky is not causing any destruction. It's blaming the victim is a really, really absolutely new form of gaslighting and abuse, and what you're engaging in is abusive. I do want to say this comment was on my video about Lex Friedman's interview with Zelensky, and it's actually quite funny that this person says that Lex Friedman is very pro-Ukrainian. No, he's not. He went to eastern Ukraine and never released the interviews he did there because they would be contrarian to his narrative. He has only ever invited many pro-Russian people that are very evidently pro-Russia onto his podcast. He also very often hosts very far-right American people that are also very pro-Russian. He has never really said anything pro-Ukrainian. He really only ever says pro-Putin, pro-Russian things, and he himself is Russian, with the Russian mentality. So that's a wrong one. And then I've already answered the NATO and the EU and all of that stuff through Kuleba. Again, you can scroll back to find that. And only Ukrainian supporters say they believe Putin will attack the rest of Europe. No, most of European leaders are saying that too. And you know, you can verify those claims by here. You know what? I'll just put it on the screen for you so it's easier. And then you saying that Zelensky did a lot of damage to his case through this interview is also factually incorrect, because if you look at all the comments under that video, the only negative comments come from Russian bots and Russians. And as we've previously noted, we don't necessarily care anymore what Russians think anymore being the keyword. And the rest of the people actually have a very positive reaction to this interview. And there is really nothing that Zelensky did as a damage to his case, because he just explained that he's a man in a very difficult situation who is doing everything that he can to help his country. And as to him being tried for his crimes, no, actually, Russia is being tried in The Hague, and Putin is wanted by the International Criminal Court. So I don't know which reality you're living in, but it's really not reality. That's all I have for you for today, and I hope that you enjoyed this format. I certainly did. I'm sorry if I was a bit, passionate about it, but I find that I do really want to educate people on these topics, and I want to be unbiased, and I want to be as understanding as possible. But some of these commentary, it's just, they're so ignorant and they're so condescending that it's hard to just be, very warm and welcoming and fuzzy. You kind of want to answer, but at the same time, you also can't necessarily answer it without being slightly upset, because, hey, I live in this every day. This is my country, and I'm experiencing it, and I'm seeing all the death and destruction, like mentioned in the previous comment, done by Russia to this country. Russia that should be tried and should be convicted and should be held accountable for all of its crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Anyways, if you enjoyed this format, please do let me know in the comments. If you would like to see more of me in the future, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on all of your notifications. And of course, like this video and send it to a friend. And I will see you next time.